I never told my wife's new leading man that I created the show that made him untouchable. When he tried to have me thrown off my own set, I didn't argue. I changed one line in the live finale. When he opened the prop box, everything he thought he owned her, the penthouse. The spotlight ended in front of 10 million people. The air inside Soundstage 7 always carried a faint mix of ozone, burnt coffee, and ambition stretched too thin. I know that sounds like something a pretentious director would say, but after 12 years of breathing it in quietly, consistently, you start to notice what the atmosphere is really made of. It's not just equipment and lighting rigs. It's hunger, ego, the low, constant hum of people trying to become something bigger than they are. I've watched unknown actors walk into that space and leave as household names. I've watched executives turn half-decent ideas into empires simply by attaching the right narrative to them. And I've watched men mediocre, forgettable men, convince themselves they built it all. Standing in the wings that afternoon, notebook in hand, I wasn't thinking about the show. I was thinking about how easily power hides in plain sight, especially when everyone is looking in the wrong direction. To anyone on set, I was just Vanessa Mercer's husband, the quiet one, the guy who lingered at the edges of conversations, nodded at the right moments, and never quite belonged to the room. I dressed simply dark jeans, worn boots, a jacket I'd owned long enough to stop noticing. I carried a notebook out of habit, not necessity. No one had ever asked what I wrote in it. No one cared enough to. That was fine with me. Vanessa, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore. She moved through Soundstage 7 like she owned its sharp heels, sharper voice, always surrounded by assistants, and people eager to agree with her. She had the kind of confidence that doesn't come from building something, but from standing close enough to it that others assume you did. She didn't create the show. She didn't write a single line of dialogue. She didn't understand why certain scenes worked and others didn't. But she knew how to present certainty. And in this industry, that's often enough. I'd watched her walk executives through production strategies I had written, explain character arcs I had spent months constructing, and accept praise meant for someone she believed didn't exist. She never once hesitated, never once looked over her shoulder, and I never corrected anyone. That was the arrangement unspoken, but absolute. I stayed invisible, and in return, I kept control of everything that mattered. The story, the structure, the direction of a show that had quietly become one of the most successful productions on network television. Vanessa thought she was standing at the center of it all. She didn't realize she was just another character. The show was called Glass Empire. 5 seasons, 12 awards, streaming numbers that made network executives speak in careful, measured tones, like they were handling something fragile and expensive. It had launched careers, reshaped time slots, and built a cultural footprint most productions spent decades chasing and never reached. It had also been created, written, and controlled by someone the industry had spent years trying and failing to identify, E.C. Vale, a name that existed in contracts, encrypted files, and carefully managed communication chains, a name that never appeared in public, never attended press events, never gave interviews, the kind of absence that turned into mythology. E.C. Vale was me, Ethan Cole Mercer. The only people who knew that were my attorney, my financial manager, and a secure server housed in a facility outside Denver that handled all primary script transmissions. Everyone else, including my wife, interacted with a version of me I had constructed for that exact purpose. I had kept it that way for 7 years. Not because I was afraid of recognition, not because I doubted the work, but because anonymity is a form of control. And I've always understood that control is far more valuable than credit. I'd been watching the production of Season 5 from a distance for months when I first noticed the shift in Vanessa. It wasn't dramatic. Betrayal never starts that way. It begins in small, almost forgettable adjustments, the kind you can explain away if you're not paying attention. She started angling her phone away from me when messages came through. Not obviously, just enough, just a few degrees. Like muscle memory adapting to a new habit. There was a new scent, too. Not hers. Something sharper, colder, expensive in a way that felt intentional. It clung faintly to her coats when she came home late, lingering longer than it should have. She stopped asking about my work, not gradually, deliberately, as if curiosity itself had been reassigned elsewhere. I told myself it was pressure. Season 5 was the largest production the network had ever committed to. The live finale alone had required months of planning. Risk analysis, contingency modeling. I had submitted a 40-page production memo through the usual encrypted channels detailing exactly how it could be executed with maximum impact and minimal exposure. Vanessa had taken that memo into a boardroom and presented it as her own strategic vision. They gave her a standing ovation. She came home that night energized, talking faster than usual, replaying the meeting like it had been a performance. I poured her a drink and listened. "I crushed it," she said. "I know," I told her. She didn't ask how I knew. She never did. The first time I saw her with Dante Vale in a way that wasn't professional, it was almost nothing. A Thursday evening, final rehearsal before a table read. I was standing in the wings, exactly where I always stood, far enough back to disappear, close enough to see everything. He leaned toward her, said something low enough that no one else could hear. She laughed, not the version she used for cameras, not the one she gave to executives. This was smaller, quieter, private, the kind of laugh people reserve for someone who's already crossed a line. I didn't react. No tightening in my chest, no rush of anger, just stillness, the kind that settles in right before something beneath the surface begins to move. I told myself it was nothing. I knew it wasn't, and instead of confronting it, I did what I've always done best. I paid attention. The day everything stopped pretending to be subtle, started like any other production day, tight schedules, controlled chaos, people moving with purpose that looked a lot like panic if you watched closely enough. I arrived just after 2 in the afternoon. I wasn't scheduled to be there in any official capacity. I rarely was. My presence existed in the margins, unquestioned, unimportant, easy to ignore. That was the role everyone understood. At 2:23 p.m., I was standing near the craft services table, flipping through my notebook, when Dante Vale walked in. He didn't enter rooms, he arrived in them. There's a specific kind of momentum that comes with being told repeatedly, publicly, and by the right people that you are essential. Dante carried that with him in the way he moved, the way conversations bent toward him before he even spoke. Vanessa was already on set. He crossed the distance between them without hesitation, leaned in, said something close to her ear. She smiled before he finished speaking. That was confirmation enough, but the real moment came minutes later. He turned, noticed me standing there, and paused. His eyes moved over me slowly, not with curiosity, but with assessment, the kind that reduces a person to a category in less than a second. His mouth curved slightly. "Who let him stay on set?" he said, not to me, but to the first assistant director standing nearby. The kid froze. Dante didn't wait for an answer. "He looks like someone who wandered in off the street," he continued, louder now. "I can't work with random people hovering around. This is a live broadcast, not a meet and greet." A few crew members looked away. Others pretended not to hear. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Vanessa stepped forward. For a brief moment, I thought irrationally that she might correct him, clarify who I was, end it before it became something else. She didn't. Instead, she exhaled like she was dealing with a minor inconvenience and turned to me. "Ethan," she said, voice controlled, professional. "Maybe go wait in the car." Not angry, not apologetic, just efficient. Dante's hand found the small of her back, not casually, not accidentally. It stayed there, familiar, deliberate, completely unhidden. Vanessa didn't move it. She leaned slightly into it. "You're distracting the talent," she added, softer now, stepping closer so only I could hear the next part. "We'll talk later. Just leave the keys on the counter when you get home." Keys on the counter, in front of a full crew, cameras, assistants, people who would remember this conversation long after the day ended. 12 years reduced to logistics. I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. She didn't flinch. There was no guilt there, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. I nodded once, turned, walked toward the exit without a word. Behind me, production resumed almost immediately. Voices rose, cues were called, movement returned. As if nothing had happened, as if everything hadn't just been confirmed. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some things, once seen clearly, don't require a second glance. I made it halfway to the exit before something pulled my attention sideways. Vanessa's phone was resting against the edge of the craft services table. Screen up, unlocked, careless, unusual for her. It lit up just as I passed. I didn't stop walking. I didn't need to. The message preview was enough. "Dante can't wait for tonight. When are you finally telling him about the penthouse? I'm not waiting another week to move in." I stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough for the world to recalibrate around a single, precise point. The penthouse, a downtown property I had purchased 6 weeks earlier through one of my holding companies. Quiet acquisition, no public record tied to my name. Floor-to-ceiling glass, structural steel, a view that sold itself before you even stepped inside. I had mentioned it to Vanessa once, casually, as a potential investment. I had never told her I was the one who owned it, because Vanessa didn't know how my finances actually worked. She knew about the inheritance, the simplified version, the one I had allowed her to understand. She didn't know about the layered accounts, the licensing streams, the production equity, the back-end participation deals that had been compounding quietly for years. She didn't know that Glass Empire didn't just pay well, it paid endlessly. She thought the penthouse was hers by proximity, by marriage, by assumption. Dante thought it was theirs by right of arrival. They were both wrong. The deed sat inside a shell company neither of them had ever heard of, a company that answered only to me. I pushed through the exit doors and stepped into the late afternoon light. The noise of the stage sealed itself behind me, replaced by something cleaner, quieter. My hands were steady, my breathing was even. Inside my head, everything had shifted into alignment. Not emotional, not reactive, structural. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a life inside something that belonged entirely to me. Using money they didn't understand, standing on foundations they didn't build. That wasn't betrayal, that was miscalculation. And miscalculations, when left uncorrected, tend to compound. I walked to my car, already mapping out the correction. I drove straight to Century City, no hesitation, no detours. By the time I pulled into the underground structure of Henderson and Cole, the situation had already reorganized itself in my mind, not as a personal crisis, but as a sequence of solvable problems. Raymond Cole billed at $1,000 an hour. He was the kind of attorney who didn't raise his voice, didn't posture, didn't waste time explaining the obvious. People paid him that kind of money because when things went wrong, he made sure they went wrong for the other side. I had kept him on retainer for 4 years. Vanessa didn't know that either. His office sat on the 46th floor, glass walls, controlled lighting, the kind of quiet that only exists in rooms where decisions carry consequences beyond the room itself. He listened for exactly 12 minutes. Didn't interrupt once. That was how I knew this wasn't routine. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, fingers steepled, eyes steady behind thin-rimmed glasses. The prenuptial agreement, he said, signed in 2012, contains both a fidelity clause and a morality clause. I nodded. If infidelity can be demonstrated and based on what you've described, it can be demonstrated very clearly your wife is entitled to nothing beyond what she brought into the marriage. He paused, just long enough for the weight of that to settle. Which, he added, glancing down at the file, appears to be a leased vehicle and approximately $12,000 in liquid assets. I didn't react. There was more. I slid a second folder across the desk. I initiated an internal audit 3 weeks ago, I said. Production accounts tied to Stage 7, expense reports, vendor invoices, discretionary funds. Raymond opened the folder. His expression shifted barely, but I had worked with him long enough to recognize it. Interest. She's been redirecting funds, I continued. Small amounts at first, then larger. 8 months total, approximately $320,000. He flipped through the pages. Bank transfers, vendor discrepancies, receipts that didn't align with production schedules, private travel, he murmured, jewelry, hotel suites, all traceable, I said, all routed through accounts tied to her executive authority. Raymond closed the folder slowly. This activates the morality clause in her employment contract as well, he said, which means immediate termination, loss of benefits, and given the amounts involved potential criminal exposure, wire fraud, I said. He nodded once, and corporate embezzlement. Silence settled between us for a moment, not heavy, not uncertain, just precise. How do you want to proceed? He asked. I turned slightly in my chair, looking at the wall-mounted monitor behind him. A live internal feed from Soundstage 7, something I had arranged access to through one of the vendor agreements my holding company controlled. Dante was on stage, running through blocking, standing exactly where he would be in a few hours, reaching for the prop box. I want both of them served, I said during the broadcast. Raymond didn't respond immediately. That's efficient, he said finally. It's accurate. I corrected. I turned back to him. I need divorce papers finalized within the next 2 hours. Filed, executed, ready for service. He made a note. Done. And an eviction notice for the penthouse. 24-hour compliance window. Another note. Also done. I paused. One more thing. He looked up. The security team on set tonight, Redline Management, I asked. He checked his tablet. Subsidiary of one of your holding companies. Which means they take operational directives from me, I said. Correct. Good. I stood, straightening my jacket. I'll need the process server to coordinate with the west entrance detail. Name's Marcus Hill. He's been briefed. Raymond watched me for a moment. Not surprised. Not impressed. Just evaluating. Ethan, he said. I paused at the door. Yes. Remind me, he said calmly, to never be on the other side of anything involving you. I allowed myself a faint smile. You already aren't, I said. That's why you're still billing me. I left his office at 4:17 p.m. in the parking structure. I opened my laptop. Encrypted. Triple authenticated. The master script file for the Season 5 finale loaded in seconds. The version the production team had access to was read-only. This one wasn't. I scrolled through years of narrative architecture, character arcs, layered conflicts, carefully placed reversals. Every line had been constructed with intent, every scene built to land exactly where it needed to. Page 47, page 48, Dante's monologue, 12 minutes of dialogue designed to make him unforgettable. I hovered over the text for a moment, not out of hesitation, out of recognition. Then I selected all of it and deleted it. The cursor blinked in the empty space where his legacy had been. I typed a single line. The truth is delivered. Saved the file, locked it, pushed it live to the broadcast system. Then I opened a secure email, routed it through 2 proxy servers, addressed it to the broadcast director and head of props. Final scene revision. Instructions were simple. Do not open the box before airtime. Authenticity is critical. Trust the process. I hit send, closed the laptop, and drove back to the studio. By the time I got back to the studio, the entire building had shifted into live broadcast mode. There's a different energy on a set when millions of people are about to watch in real time. Conversations shorten, movements sharpen, even the air feels tighter, like it's holding its breath along with everyone inside it. Soundstage 7 was already sealed. Security tighter than usual, crew moving with purpose, assistants running last-minute checks like their careers depended on it. For most of them, they did. For me, this wasn't pressure, it was timing. I didn't go to the main floor immediately. Instead, I slipped into the control room and took a seat in the back corner far enough to stay out of the way. Close enough to see everything that mattered. Banks of monitors flickered in front of me. Camera feeds, lighting grids, audio levels, the entire production reduced to signals and structure. Exactly how I preferred it. At 7:12 p.m., the prop master confirmed delivery. The box was in place, locked, untouched, exactly where it needed to be. No one questioned it. They never do when instructions come from the right name. E.C. Vale had requested a last-minute revision to the final sequence, something about emotional authenticity, about capturing a genuine reaction that couldn't be rehearsed. In this industry, those words are currency. People don't argue with them, they build around them. At 7:26 p.m., the broadcast director received my message. I watched him read it on the monitor, reflection eyes scanning, jaw tightening slightly, then settling into acceptance. He didn't know what was inside the box. He didn't need to. He trusted the work. That was enough. Everything after that moved like clockwork. Camera assignments locked. Teleprompter synced to the master file, the one I had already rewritten. Audio channels tested. Lighting cues finalized. All of it feeding into a system I had designed years ago to function without friction. That was the part no one ever understood. They thought control came from being the loudest voice in the room. From issuing orders, from standing in front of the cameras. It doesn't. Real control is quieter than that. It lives in systems, in access points, in the small, invisible permissions that determine what happens and what doesn't. Vanessa thought she controlled the production because she could walk into a room and make people listen. Dante thought he controlled it because millions of people watched him every week. Neither of them realized the outcome had already been decided hours ago. Not by force, not by confrontation, but by a single line of code pushed into a system they didn't know existed. At 7:41 p.m., I checked the master feed one last time. Page 48, still blank, except for one instruction. The truth is delivered. No monologue, no safety net, no performance to hide behind. Just reality. I leaned back slightly in my chair, eyes on the monitors, listening to the controlled chaos settle into something more precise. This wasn't revenge. Not in the way most people understand it. This was correction, a recalibration of roles, a necessary adjustment to a story that had drifted too far from the truth. And in less than 20 minutes, the truth was going to be broadcast live. At 7:58 p.m., the countdown began. The control room shifted into silence, not complete silence, but the kind where every sound becomes intentional. Headsets crackled, fingers hovered over switches, eyes locked onto monitors like nothing else existed. Stand by. Camera 1. Audio ready. 30 seconds. I stayed where I was. Back corner. Unnoticed. Exactly where I had always been. Vanessa entered the control room at 7:59. Perfect timing. She wore confidence like armor sharp. Polished. Impenetrable. Two network executives flanked her, nodding along as she spoke in that measured tone she used when she wanted to sound like she understood everything. She saw me. For a moment, something flickered across her face, irritation, mostly, maybe a trace of disbelief that I was still there. She broke away from the executives and walked toward me. "I told you to go home," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. She studied me for a second longer than usual. Something in my tone must have registered, but not enough, not yet. "This isn't the place for whatever you think you're doing," she added. "I'm not doing anything," I said, lifting a paper cup of tea from the console beside me. "Just watching." Her jaw tightened. "For you," she said. "This is already over. I know what tonight is," I replied. That made her pause, a brief hesitation. Barely there. Then it was gone. She turned, walked back to the executives, and resumed the version of herself she believed everyone needed to see. 10 seconds. The main monitor came alive. Soundstage 7 filled the screen, lighting perfect, shadows deliberate, every detail engineered to look effortless. The set of the Glass Empire penthouse scene, the one that had taken 6 months to design, the one with the box. Dante stood center frame, perfect posture, perfect expression, the kind of controlled emotional weight that wins awards. He was good, I had always known that. For the first 8 minutes, everything ran exactly as written. Dialogue sharp, timing precise, camera movement fluid. It was a flawless performance, a flawless illusion, until it wasn't. The final sequence began. Dante crossed the room slowly, measured steps, eyes fixed on the fireplace mantel. The ornate wooden box sat exactly where it was supposed to be. Every camera angle aligned, every cue executed. The audience leaned in, millions watching, waiting. He reached the steps, climbed them, paused, let the silence stretch just long enough to matter. Then he spoke his final line, a line that used to lead into a 12-minute monologue. Now, nothing followed, just the stage direction. The truth is delivered. Dante hesitated. A fraction of a second. Confusion flickered subtle, almost invisible. Then training took over. He continued. He reached for the box, unlatched it, opened it, and everything broke. I've replayed that moment in my head more than once, not out of doubt, but out of clarity. The exact instant a person realizes reality has shifted beneath them. His face changed in less than 2 seconds. Not performance, not acting, shock, real, unfiltered, immediate. He looked down into the box, hands still, breath caught somewhere between confusion and recognition. Then he reached inside, pulled out the folder, thick, official, impossible to ignore. His eyes scanned the first page. Color drained from his face. What? His voice cracked. Not scripted, not controlled, real. He looked up, straight into camera 1. Vanessa in the control room. Everything unraveled. She's off script. Cut to camera 2. Camera 2's locked what the hell panic spread in controlled bursts. Too late. The system was already set. Camera 1 held. Live feed unbroken. 10 million people watching the moment unfold in real time. I stood, walked to the control room door, opened it, and stepped onto the stage. The lights hit harder than people expect. Hot, direct, unforgiving. But I didn't hesitate. I walked past the curtain, past the line that separated observer from participant, into the center of it. Every microphone picked up the sound of my footsteps. Concrete, measured, final. Dante turned toward me, still holding the folder, eyes wide, searching for something that wasn't there. Vanessa burst onto the stage, seconds later, breath tight, composure already cracking. "What is this?" she demanded, voice sharp, forced. "What did you do?" I didn't answer her immediately. I looked at the camera, held it. For a moment that belonged entirely to me. Then I spoke. Cut. The word carried, clean, precise, absolute. It didn't stop the broadcast, but it changed everything inside it. Dante took a step back. "This isn't part of the script," he said, voice rising. "You're right. I replied. It's not. I nodded toward the folder in his hands. That's an eviction notice, effective immediately. The penthouse you thought you were moving into. I paused. It's mine. Silence. Heavy. Total. I continued. Under that, you'll find documentation outlining financial misconduct tied to production funds. Money that doesn't belong to either of you. Vanessa's expression fractured. You can't do this, she said. I already did, I replied. Security stepped onto the stage. Not rushing, not aggressive, just present, controlled. Dante looked between them, then back at me. You're nobody, he said, grasping for anything. You don't get to walk in here, and I built this. I cut in, not louder, just final. He stopped. Vanessa stared at me like she was seeing something she had spent years refusing to acknowledge. For anyone still confused, I said, turning slightly toward the main camera, my name is Ethan Mercer. A beat. I'm E.C. Vale. The room didn't react all at once. It fractured. Sound hitting different people at different speeds. Realization spreading in waves. I stepped back slightly, giving the moment space to land. Effective immediately. I continued. The current lead is no longer part of this production. Dante didn't move. Couldn't. Vanessa looked like she might say something, fight, argue, salvage, but the words never formed, because there was nothing left to argue. The truth had already been delivered, and there was no script left to hide behind. The feed cut less than 10 seconds later, not because anyone in the control room regained control, because the network had no choice. There are moments that can't be managed, spun, or edited in real time, only contained. This wasn't one of them. By the time the broadcast went dark, the damage had already been done. Clips hit the internet within minutes. Dante's face caught in that exact moment, between confidence and collapse, circulated faster than anything the show had ever produced intentionally. Frame-by-frame breakdowns, reaction videos, headlines that didn't need embellishment. Live TV meltdown, star exposed on air, mystery creator reveals himself. The industry doesn't forgive unpredictability, it punishes it. Dante's agency dropped him within 48 hours. Official statement, unforeseen liability concerns. Unofficial reality, no one wants to insure a man who can't hold a scene together when the script disappears. Endorsements vanished next. A luxury watch brand, a streaming deal, a fragrance line worth 8 figures collectively, all gone within a week. Contracts dissolved under morality clauses, written for exactly this kind of public implosion. Casting directors stopped returning calls. Studios went silent. The same people who had been calling him irreplaceable quietly removed him from every future conversation. Vanessa's fall was slower, but heavier. The internal audit I'd initiated moved from private documentation to formal investigation within days. Once the network's legal department saw the numbers clean, organized, impossible to dispute, they acted quickly. Suspension, termination, full cooperation with authorities. The charges weren't theoretical anymore. Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, enough evidence to build a case without interpretation. Her attorney tried to negotiate. There wasn't much to negotiate with. The prenuptial agreement held exactly as written. She left the marriage with what she brought into it, which was almost nothing. The penthouse remained empty for 3 weeks, long enough for the message to settle. Long enough for both of them to understand that nothing they had planned together had ever actually belonged to them. I didn't contact either of them, didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said, publicly, permanently. The narrative had corrected itself, not through force, through exposure, and once the truth becomes visible at that scale, there's no rebuilding from it, only distance, only consequence, only the slow, irreversible collapse of everything that was built on a lie. I moved into Vanessa's office the following week, not immediately. I gave it a few days long enough for the noise to settle, for the headlines to shift from speculation to confirmation, for the building itself to reset around a new center of gravity. Then I had the office cleared. Everything she'd filled it with heavy furniture, dark wood. The kind of aggressive design choices people use to project authority was removed, replaced with clean lines, natural light, space that didn't need to announce itself to be understood. Control doesn't need decoration, it just needs clarity. The staff adjusted faster than expected. Not because they were loyal to me, they didn't know me well enough for that, but because the system still worked. Schedules held, decisions were made quickly, problems were solved without performance. People don't resist authority when it functions, they resist confusion. I eliminated that. My new assistant, Clara, had been on the junior script team for 8 months. Quiet, observant, the kind of person who listens more than they speak, which usually means they understand more than they let on. I gave her a raise on her second day, told her I wasn't paying for agreement, I was paying for accuracy. She adjusted immediately. Good instincts, better analysis. The kind of mind that improves structure without needing credit for it. I trusted her within a week. Production resumed under my name. Not the pseudonym, not the absence. Me. Ethan Mercer. E.C. Vale wasn't a secret anymore, and that changed the way people listened. Season 5's finale had to be rebuilt. The original structure was no longer usable, not after what had happened. But I had always written redundancies into the narrative, alternate exits, secondary arcs that could be activated if needed. I pulled one forward, recast the lead, reframed the final act. What had been designed as a character's ascension became something else entirely, an unraveling that felt more honest than the original version ever had. We shot it in 9 days, aired it 2 weeks later. The response was immediate. Not just viewership, though the numbers exceeded projections, but critical reception. Analysts called it intentional, bold, structurally superior. 3 awards followed, not because of what had happened, because of how it had been resolved. That distinction mattered. Offers started coming in after that. Studios that had spent years trying to identify E.C. Vale now knew exactly where to send contracts. Projects that would have taken months to negotiate moved in weeks. I accepted selectively, not for scale, for control. 6 months later, I stood outside the theater on the night of the award ceremony. My name printed clearly. For the first time, no separation, no division between identity and authorship. People spoke to me differently now. Not louder, not more respectful, just accurately. They knew where the decisions came from, and that changed everything. I didn't feel vindicated. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about removing the distortion, the version of the story that had been allowed to exist, because I had chosen not to correct it. That version was gone. What remained was simpler, cleaner, true, and for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. 6 months changes more than people expect. Not the surface details, the headlines fade. The conversations shift. The industry finds something new to orbit around. That part is predictable. What changes is quieter, internal, structural. The way you understand your own position in the world. I used to think invisibility was a strategy, a deliberate choice, a way to move through spaces without resistance, to observe without interference, to build without attracting the kind of attention that complicates things. And for a long time, it worked. I built something substantial in that silence, something durable. But there's a difference between choosing to remain unseen and slowly becoming someone people stop seeing at all. That line is easy to miss. I missed it. 12 years of conversations where I wasn't asked questions that mattered. 12 years of achievements filtered through someone else's name, someone else's presence. I told myself it didn't matter, that the work was enough, that control behind the scenes was more valuable than recognition in front of it. Part of that was true, not all of it. There's a cost to letting other people define the visible version of your life, a gradual erosion, not dramatic enough to trigger resistance, just steady enough to become normal, until it isn't. That afternoon on the stage wasn't about revenge. It looked like that from the outside. I understand why. Public exposure has a way of simplifying things into something easier to categorize. But what actually happened was correction, a realignment between what existed and what was being presented. Vanessa believed proximity to power was the same as owning it. Dante believed attention was the same as control. They weren't unique in that assumption. Most people in this industry operate under some version of it. They chase visibility. They equate presence with authority. They stand in the light and assume the light belongs to them. It doesn't. The light is just a tool, a projection, something that can be redirected, reframed, or removed entirely depending on who's controlling the system behind it. That's the part most people never see, the architecture, the invisible framework that determines what gets built, what gets funded, what gets rewritten, and what gets erased. That's where the real decisions live. That's where I've always been. The difference now is that I don't confuse silence with strength anymore. I don't step back out of habit. I don't allow assumptions to stand when they distort something that matters. Not because I need recognition, but because accuracy matters more than comfort. I still spend most of my time behind the scenes. That hasn't changed. I still write alone, still build structures that other people will eventually stand inside and believe they understand. But I'm no longer a background figure in my own work. That version of me doesn't exist anymore. The industry will keep doing what it does, creating narratives, elevating the visible, mistaking performance for substance. That doesn't change. What changes is where you stand in relation to it. I used to stand in the wings. Now I decide what happens on stage. And if there's one thing I've learned, really learned, it's this: power doesn't belong to the person in front of the camera. It belongs to the one who writes the words, builds the structure, controls the system, and knows exactly when to say cut. If you stayed until the end, you already understand the difference between noise and control. Follow for more stories where the truth doesn't stay hidden for long.